Welcome to this rapid revision session on the Reno Gang versus the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Why was the West so lawless, and what could be done about it? Lawlessness and the Civil War. The Civil War, 1861 to 65, created the conditions for lawlessness while the US government was focused on securing Union victory over the Southern Confederacy. The American Civil War is not a big part of this course, but it is worth being aware that it was going on at the same time as many of these events here, and often distracted the government. Gangs of trained and often, let's face it, traumatized former soldiers ran riot, and former Confederates felt little, if any, loyalty to the United States authority. After all, they were from a place that had chosen to leave the Union to back up slavery. The new railroad network also proved a tempting and easy target for armed and desperate robbers in remote areas. One such desperate group was the Reno Gang. Here we can see Frank Reno and John Reno, who led this gang. One group of Civil War deserters was the Reno Gang. They terrorized people and bribed their way to freedom with the money that they stole. In 1866, they carried out a train robbery, stealing a massive $16,000 from a safe carried aboard. But that was nothing. They were not done yet. The railroad company hired the Pinkerton Private Detective Agency, who caught John Reno. However, in 1867 and in 1868, the gang struck again and again. Their fourth robbery netted a massive $96,000, nearest to $1 million today. So who were the Pinkerton Detective Agency? Have a look at their logo there. An eye watching like spies. We never sleep. Founded in 1850, the Pinkerton Detective Agency was a private company that investigated crimes. These are known as private investigators, or PIs. Effectively, you can hire them to investigate crimes instead of the police. In the era where territories and remote states had little formal law and order, except for US Marshals and territories and elected sheriffs, people turned to the Pinkerton private investigators and other companies like them. They would investigate the crimes in return for a fee. This explains why the railroad turned to the Pinkertons to apprehend the Reno Gang. In capturing John Reno, it shows why they had some success. So what happened in the end for the Reno Gang? The end of the line for the Reno Gang. Notice the Vigilance Committee notice down here. Vigilance committees were groups of ordinary people who set up their own private justice without waiting for the official authorities. Notice is given that any person found pilfering, stealing, robbing, or committing any act of lawless violence will be summarily hanged. That means without a trial. The Reno's fifth train robbery undid them. One robber was arrested and in return for a reduced sentence gave up the rest of the gang. The Pinkertons used this information to arrest the gang, but then a vigilance committee arrived. As so often with vigilante justice, the men were taken and summarily hanged without a formal trial. This is the sort of thing that could happen when private investigators and ordinary people took the law into their own hands. Eventually, by the 1890s, the US government wanted to act. However, the Pinkertons were also, earlier on, hired by federal government to investigate crimes before their own agencies were able to tackle them. As the Pinkerton agents were able to investigate crimes across states, this was something that sheriffs couldn't do. They were, for a time, useful to the US government. But this was controversial, as the government was paying a private company to pursue criminals on behalf of the USA as a whole, sometimes using them like hired soldiers to break up strikes instead of investigating crimes. In 1893, the Anti-Pinkerton Act was passed. This controlled the government's use of private investigators so that the government could no longer act in a corrupt way and use the Pinkertons whoever they wanted. This was a move towards a federal government having a group that could investigate crimes across state lines. You could refer to this as being a Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI was founded later, in 1908, but in some respects took over the work that the Pinkertons had done before. Some final points. The Civil War provided the lawless conditions for violent gangs of robbers to thrive. The Reno Gang were one such group of outlaws robbing trains. Private companies like the railroads and the government alike turned to the Pinkerton Detective Agency with some success. However, as federal authority increased, the need for Pinkertons decreased, and their use became more controversial, eventually paving the way for stronger federal controls and investigative powers. So that's how the Reno Gang came up against the Pinkerton Detective Agency, who eventually won. I hope that rapid revision session has been useful to you. If it has, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you've got another topic you'd like me to cover, pop it in the comments. But for now, goodbye.